When Konami finally releases Peace Walker as part of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2, a lot of players are gonna experience one of the strangest games in the entire franchise. Not because it's bad, not because it's forgotten, but because there's a very real argument that Peace Walker was never supposed to be a side game at all. In fact, depending on who you ask, you could make a compelling case that Peace Walker is actually the real Metal Gear Solid 5. And honestly, the evidence is stronger than most people realize. For years, Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, has occupied a strange place in the franchise. It's officially the 5th numbered entry, but mechanically and narratively, so much of its DNA can be traced directly back to Peace Walker that it almost feels like Kojima spent 5 years remaking his own ideas on a much larger scale. To understand why, we need to go back to 2010. When Peace Walker launched on the PSP, many fans viewed it as a portable spin-off. That assumption made sense at the time. It wasn't on PlayStation 3, and it didn't have a number in the title. And compared to the cinematic presentation to Metal Gear Solid 4, it looked like a smaller project, but Kojima never viewed it that way. Internally, development discussions reportedly treated the game as a direct continuation of the saga. Kojima himself repeatedly described it as the next major chapter in Big Boss's story. In interviews around release, he emphasized that this wasn't a side adventure like Portable Ops. This was the future of Metal Gear, and looking back, he was absolutely right, because almost every major gameplay system that defines the Phantom Pain first appeared in Peace Walker. The mission structure, Peace Walker did it first. Instead of one long linear campaign, players selected operations from a mission menu, completing story chapters and side missions separately. At the time, this felt radically different from previous Metal Gear games, but today, it's basically the blueprint for the Phantom Pain. Mother Base, recruiting soldiers, managing departments, researching weapons, building an army, Peace Walker did it first. Even the famous Fulton recovery system, the mechanic that became synonymous with MGS5, began here, albeit in a much simpler form.
Fulton recovery subject confirmed onboard helicopter.
The more you examine the two games, the harder it becomes to ignore the reality that the Phantom Pain often feels less like a sequel and more like the ultimate evolution of ideas that originated on Sony's little handheld. And that raises an interesting question. If Peace Walker established a gameplay foundation, perhaps its story deserves the MGS5 label even more. Because narratively, this is where Big Boss truly becomes Big Boss.
You're damn right.
Not the legendary soldier, not the reluctant hero from Snake Eater. The Big Boss who will eventually become the villain of the original Metal Gear games. Many fans point to Metal Gear Solid 3 as the birth of Big Boss. I think Peace Walker is where the transformation actually happens. Throughout the game, Big Boss is haunted by the memory of the boss. Everything he does revolves around understanding her final sacrifice. The tragedy is that he never truly does.
Do you know what it means?
Being patriotic.
One of the most fascinating interpretations discussed throughout the Metal Gear community is that Big Boss spends the entire game misunderstanding the person he admired most. The boss sacrificed herself to create peace. Big Boss interprets that sacrifice through the lens of a soldier. The boss wanted nations to transcend borders. Big Boss creates a nation built entirely around soldiers. The boss envisioned a world without endless conflict. Big Boss builds a system that depends on conflict for survival. And that's what makes the ending so heartbreaking. He doesn't reject her. He idolizes her. He elevates her into a myth. But in doing so, he misses the very lesson she wanted him to learn. It's one of the most tragic character arcs Kojima ever wrote because Big Boss genuinely believes he's honoring her legacy while simultaneously moving further away from it. Then there's Mother Base. At first glance, Mother Base feels like a gameplay mechanic. a fun progression system, a place to recruit soldiers and unlock better equipment. But when you step back and think about it, Mother Base fundamentally changes what Metal Gear is asking the player to do. For decades, Snake was a lone infiltrator, one man against impossible odds. You snuck into enemy territory, you avoided detection, you survived. Peace Walker flips that formula upside down. Now, you're the boss. You're hiring soldiers, expanding infrastructure, developing weapons, managing personnel, and creating military strength. The player isn't just controlling Big Boss anymore. The player is becoming Big Boss. And that is a fascinating shift because the game slowly transforms you into the exact thing the previous Metal Gear protagonists were sent to stop. And it's probably one of the most underappreciated design decisions in the franchise. Of course, not every idea was universally loved. The giant tank battles and AI weapon fights remain controversial even today. Some players love them. Others see them as repetitive bullet sponges. What's interesting is how strange they feel when placed alongside the game's anti-war themes. One minute, you're listening to the philosophical discussions about nuclear deterrence, Cold War politics, and the nature of peace. The next minute, you're unloading thousands of rounds into a gigantic robot. It's a classic example of the tension that's always existed within Metal Gear. Kojima wanted players to question warfare while simultaneously creating some of the coolest military action sequences in gaming. And somehow, against all odds, it usually works. Then there's co-op. For the first time in series history, Metal Gear actively encouraged players to tackle missions together. This dramatically changed the tone. Metal Gear traditionally thrives on isolation. You're alone, outnumbered, cut off from support. Peace Walker challenges that formula by turning infiltration into a shared experience. Some fans loved it. Others felt it pushed the series closer to action gaming. Regardless of where you stand, there's no denying that co-op became one of the game's defining features and helped establish mechanics that would influence future entries. Looking back from 2026, Peace Walker feels less like a portable side project and more like a missing piece of franchise history. It's the bridge between the classic Metal Gear and the modern Metal Gear. The point where the series stopped being solely about stealth missions and started becoming something larger. A management simulator, a military sandbox, a philosophical tragedy. A story about a man trying to honor his mentor while accidentally becoming everything she fought against. So when the Master Collection Volume 2 arrives, don't think of Peace Walker as the PSP game that sits between MGS4 and MGS5. Think of it as a game that made MGS5 possible. Because whether you call it Peace Walker or Metal Gear Solid 5, its fingerprints are everywhere.